Before we jump into today's episode, I want to talk to you about Giver for Connor. It's my latest fundraising campaign that I do through my Giver for Charity organization, and I'm raising money for a very special boy named Connor, who I met when he was just 8 years old. I met him at a wrestling show, and I recently reconnected with him and his family and was surprised to hear that he is a walking miracle. Connor was not supposed to live past the age of 18. And when I recently reconnected with him, I learned that he is now 22 years old. So he is literally a walking miracle. But when I met him when he was only 8, he had a lot of medical issues, and he still has those medical issues, as well as a number of growing medical concerns and hospital bills and medical bills that continue to just keep going up and up. So I decided that I wanted to do something for him and his family, and I've started a fundraiser to try to relieve some of that financial stress off of his family. So if you go right now to givesendgo.com/giver for Connor, that's GIVERFORCONOR, that's givesendgo.com/giver for Connor. You can learn more about this fundraising campaign, and if you would, it'd be great if you could just donate a few dollars. So that's givesendgo.com/giver for Connor. We don't want to just give her for charity. We want to give her for my buddy Connor. givesendgo.com/giver for Connor.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life is wrestling.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener. I am Cody Diener, and I am a professional wrestler. I'm also a professional wrestling producer, both wrestling and producing with Impact Wrestling, soon to be come January. Once again, TNA Wrestling. Yeah. And I am also a traveling professional motivational speaker. I am a father of 4 amazing children and a husband to a beautiful wife. And I am also a podcaster. This is my podcast. If this is your first time listening or watching Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener, thank you for joining us. Welcome here. You're going to love this episode, and I'm going to start right off the hop by sharing the love that other people have given me. I say often, hey guys, write a review, write a comment over on youtube.com/@CodyDienerPodcast. If you give me a cool comment, a positive review, I'm going to read it right here on the show. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I want to read a comment from SJS_hooligan95 over on YouTube. SJS_hooligan95 was listening to both part 1 and part 2 of my interview with the wonderful Jessica Havoc. If you haven't listened to both of those parts, go over and do it right now. They're available in the archives on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And also on YouTube, you can go watch those right now. But let me just read something that SJS_hooligan95 wrote on YouTube. I love it so much. Listen to this. I absolutely loved both parts of this interview. Jessica is one of the best, and she's inspired me a lot. She's also the first professional wrestler to ever take my emotions seriously and give me solid, amazing advice on how I can attempt to push past it in my own life. She's just truly a solid human being. I don't view her as some big celebrity, but rather an amazing individual who's helped guide my life to a more positive, centered environment. Wow. That's what this is all about. When I started this project many months ago, I thought I want to see if I can create this positive project, this positive podcast where I'm not throwing shade and I'm not sharing dirt. I'm just talking to some amazing individuals about their journey in professional wrestling and the life lessons that they have learned along the way. I've been a traveling professional motivational speaker for about a decade. And that's what I do at schools. I go into schools and I share my journey. And as I share my journey with them, I talk to them about the lessons that I've learned along the way and how maybe those lessons could help them in their life in some way. I've taken that concept of what I've been doing for a decade at schools and with young people, and I've transferred it into the podcast platform. And I talk to my friends and people that I've met in my journey and get them to share their journey with me, but not just share the journey, really try to dive into the takeaways and the lessons that we can learn from that journey. I've been doing that for the last couple months, and people like SJS_hooligan 95 over on YouTube has found that that has helped them. Not only that, I love what she says about how Jessica's not like this celebrity on this platform. They're just another human being that's, traveling through this crazy thing we call life and trying to navigate this world in a positive way. And we're sharing that positive stuff with you guys. So thank you for that comment. If you have been enjoying this project that I have been going on for the last couple months, please review it on your podcast right now. It helps the algorithm. Give it a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this. It helps me out a lot, and it just helps support the show. That's one way you can support. The other way you can support, excuse me, is if you want to become a patron. You can go over to patreon.com/Cody Diener right now, and you can get every single episode early and ad-free. I typically cut all of my conversations into 2 parts. You don't have to wait for part 2 with any of these guests. You get it early, you get it ad-free, and it's not broken into parts. It's just the full conversation over on patreon.com/Cody Diener, as well as a bonus story. Every single person I interview, after I'm done the interview, we jump back on the interview for another 5-10 minutes, and they share some stories with me. And those are stories that do not come for free, do not get uploaded onto Apple or Spotify or YouTube. They are only available to my very special patrons over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. So go check out all the full conversation archives as well as all the bonus stories, and consider supporting me in this project so I can keep calling myself a professional podcaster, which means I got to make a little bit of money doing this. Otherwise, I can't bring it to you each and every week for free. One company that is helping me bring this to you for free is Rest When Dead Clothing. They are a proud sponsor of this podcast, and I am a proud sponsored athlete. I'm constantly wearing their swag, including this wicked awesome sweater that I'm wearing right now that you can't see if you're listening to this in your car or while you're doing your daily chores. You can't see it, but if you go over to youtube.com/@CodyDienerPodcast, you can see this awesome sweater I'm wearing, this awesome hat I'm wearing, and the awesome t-shirt in the background. You can check out their entire collection over at Rest When Dead Clothing. Check them out on Instagram or restwhendead.ca. I love my Rest When Dead, so go check them out, support them, and support that wicked awesome company as you're supporting me as well. Today's guest is part 2 with Colin Hunter from Kayfabe News. As we started last week, you learned this is a little bit different. This is a different conversation with Colin than some of my previous guests for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is he's not a professional wrestler. I had David Sahadi on a couple weeks ago, which I got amazing feedback on. I love my buddy David Sahadi. You can go check out his brand new book. It's available on Amazon for those of you that listen to that conversation and have been wanting and waiting to listen or buy his book that we talked about at length, My Dad, My Dying Son, which was co-written along with Lou Sahadi, his legendary sports writing father. You can go check that out on Amazon right now. Go check out My Dad, My Dying Son. But I had David Sahadi on, who is not a professional wrestler. This is my second non-professional wrestling guest, but he's deeply connected to professional wrestling. He is a professional wrestling writer. He's done a lot. And if you, like me, are a fan of a really funny, enjoyable, positive, hilarious website known as Kayfabe News, then you are a fan of Colin Hunter, because he created Kayfabe News a decade ago through some conversations that he had with some very famous professional wrestlers, guys that I am very familiar with and have connected with along my journey as well. And that is Colt Cabana and Mick Foley. At the end of last week, we were just jumping into those two individuals and how Colin decided to make Kayfabe News a reality. That was the cliffhanger last week. We stopped right there, and now we're going to jump into the rest of this conversation. We take a lot of tangents in this conversation that I wasn't expecting to jump into with Colin, but some tangents that I think you wrestling fans are really going to enjoy. We have gone off on tangents on uh, how to structure a professional wrestling show, the psychology of a professional wrestling match when it's an independent wrestling show where you're not going to be in the town until a year later. We take some deep dives into some kind of lessons, and we just go on some tangents and rabbit holes that, again, I wasn't expecting, but I think you guys are going to really enjoy, and I think they're super insightful. So I do that with my buddy Colin. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will again see that this interview was done in person in Colin's home. So I want to again thank you, Colin, for getting the equipment set up. Our mutual friend Sarah was the person that was running the audio, running the video. She got all of that sorted and edited and sent to me so that I could give this to you. So a big thanks to Sarah and a thank you to Colin for inviting me into his home. Before we jump into this next part two, you're going to hear us also talk about Colin's connection to wrestling. Isn't just through Kayfabe News, isn't just through him writing for PWI Magazine, but he's got a new movie that he's currently funding through Kickstarter. It's called The Ref Didn't See It. Colin has always loved professional wrestling, just like a lot of you listeners, and he wanted to get involved in wrestling. So he got his foot in the door through Kayfabe News. And now, just in the last couple of years, he's decided, well, I want to try to get into the ring. And I have a healthy respect for the third person that's in the ring with those wrestlers, and that is the referee. So Colin has jumped in the world of being a professional wrestling referee, and he's documented that journey in this movie called The Ref Didn't See It. I star in the movie. I do some interviews and some connecting with Colin and reviewing the time that he spent in the ring. I was in the ring for one of Colin's matches, gave him some post-match pointers, and there's lots of that. There's Earl Hebner, there's Colt Cabana, there's lots of amazing people. If you want to learn more about this project and how you can support it, go to therefmovie.com. That's therefmovie.com. You can learn about this wonderful movie, this wonderful project, and Colin's interesting, hilarious, and also touching journey into wanting to be a professional wrestling referee. So go check that out. Support him, support me, support my sponsors, and enjoy this next part for part two with my buddy from Kayfabe News, Colin Hunter. So Kayfabe News, how does this start? Where does the idea come from? When did it happen? Let's start with the year. I'm curious.
It was just over 10 years ago.
Oh, it was a decade ago.
2012. Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
so I've been doing for more than 10 years.
So what led to this? The impetus of this idea, or even
it was a couple of things. It was a couple of conversations with people who you know, I'm sure, people who combine comedy and wrestling. So one was Mick Foley, and the other was Colt Cabana.
Okay.
Mick Foley, I went to see him do his spoken word storytelling show in Waterloo, Ontario.
Okay.
I perhaps encouraged myself with a little liquid courage and introduced myself. Pardon me.
Mick is so amazing.
Yeah,
by the way,
I didn't just introduce myself. I invited myself to dinner after his show, literally. But I had this idea in mind, and it was from talking to Colt Cabana, he's doing comedy and improv and doing his podcast. Your podcast very much, I think, is kind of like a spiritual successor to the Colt Cabana podcast.
Thank you for that. That's big praise.
Yeah, and I've listened to every episode of that because I love hearing about wrestlers talk about something other than wrestling.
Sure.
I actually considered once doing a podcast called Wrestlers Talking About Anything But Wrestling.
Yeah.
Because, you know,
sure.
that's what I love, the behind the scenes stuff. But Kayfabe News, I talked to these two influential people about comedy and wrestling, and I got it in my head, well, there's no onion type satire for Kayfabe News. And I thought, I'll give it a try. I don't know how to start a website, don't know how to do anything, but I had a couple friends who helped me build a rudimentary website. And I just told myself, I think I wrote a dozen stories before publishing, so I had sort of an official looking website with content on it. And just started going and thought, well, you know, I'll do it for a little bit and see if anyone pays attention. And a few people paid attention, and it started to catch on. And I remember getting my first 100 followers, and I thought, I can't believe 100 people are following this. And, you know, that was 70,000 followers ago or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I got to 1,000 followers, I was like, oh, that's incredible. It's just, and it just kept on going and going, where I tried to write an article every day, whether I had an idea or not. The challenge was to sit down at the computer and come up with something funny, something satirical to say either about wrestling or use wrestling to make a comment about something else in the world. So as you know, wrestling is very much a microcosm for politics, for social issues, for class struggles, for everything else that we go through. You know, the greatest storyline of all time was the corporate billionaire versus the redneck employee, right? And so a lot of times the satire it's about life, using wrestling as the microcosm to tell it, or it's inspired by life, and it's a wrestling story that illustrates some sort of satirical point. You know, ideally, satire has some sort of message behind it, something a little deeper.
Absolutely.
Not always. Sometimes it's just for a laugh. Sure. It's often just for a laugh. But
the good satire always has more to it.
Yeah.
Under that, the onion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember I was so thrilled when I learned that the writers' room at WWE would talk about my stories in the writers' room, because we've talked to one of the head writers, and they all liked it, even though it was making fun of their product. It does it in kind of a gentle, playful way that's never malicious. And I never want to make anyone unhappy, because that's the opposite of the point of comedy, right?
Right.
So I only make fun of fictional characters that are played by real human beings, and try not to pick on the real human beings who play them.
That's good. That's a razor blade to walk.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it's a fine, sometimes you overstep, and sometimes people are ticked off by something I write. And sometimes what I think is funny is not all that funny. And sometimes I think something that's a clunker just takes off and goes through the roof. But I was told that even Vince McMahon himself would get a chuckle out of them, that the writers would sometimes show him, hey, Vince, check out this. And he'd go, ha, ha, ha. Which is, you know, to me, that's the biggest thrill. And occasionally, one of my jokes will get used, that I can tell that they've read my article and they use it in the storyline on WWE. So I made a joke. Do you remember when Mae Young, the octogenarian Mae Young, got pregnant by Mark Henry and gave birth to a hand?
Of course.
One of the most,
you not remember that insanity?
You know, this kind of thing doesn't happen every day. In fact, it never ever happens. But she gave birth to this rubber hand, and I did a story many, many years later saying that Mae Young's baby hand is all grown up now. And the next Monday on Raw, they had a guy in a hand costume come out and say, I'm Mae Young's baby hand, and I'm all grown up now. And I was like, I can't believe it.
Serious?
I like,
oh, wow.
It's sort of a few layers removed. I kind of wrote a joke for Monday Night Raw.
Yes, you did.
And a few people said, oh, you should sue them for stealing your material. I'm like, are you kidding? I've been stealing their material for 10 years, every single day. I've been stealing their photos. They don't seem to mind. But I think it's the same kind of thing as PWI. As long as I'm, you know, it's clear I wouldn't do this if I didn't like wrestling, if I wasn't kind of celebrating it and celebrating its weirdness. And I think it's clear that I'm doing this out of love and not, it's not just crapping all over wrestling, which does happen. You've seen the internet wrestling community. I like to say it's a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. That community, it can be very negative, and people focus on all the wrong things. I think I don't understand why people don't get joy out of wrestling. Why they focus on the negatives, and all the things that they hate about it. Another kayfabe news story was a wrestling fan bemoans the current product for 27th consecutive year. Right? There's some people who are their relationship with wrestling is one of it being constantly a disappointment to them.
Yeah.
And the more and more time I spend around wrestling, the more all of it is just joy for me. Like, I swear, I don't mean to keep bringing this up, but just watching you work a crowd of children, it's like a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. It's like it's a work of art, and I used to think it's lesser art than other forms of art, but I don't think that either. The emotion is just as raw and real.
Well, that leads to, so I have so many questions that come to mind, because everything you just said, you dropped a lot of really insightful things over the span of that last 2 minutes. One thing that I want to ask is, related to what you just said, like, I only do things because I love it. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason those kids are drawn to me, and I'm literally could be a Pied Piper and they'd follow me, is because there's something, I want to even use the word spiritual, about them connecting and going, I'm going to follow that guy. Yeah. Because like there's something about him that makes me want to follow it. And I think they're tapping into this love, this positive energy that I have. And that's why they're following me around. Are you somebody that you only want to do what you love, and you'll sacrifice other things to make sure that you're doing that? Because you obviously love kayfabe news, and you love the process.
I'll tell you, I loved my last job, and I quit it to make this movie we're going to talk about. But
wow, good, good for you, man.
I do.
That takes balls that a lot of people don't have, man.
It's it was time for a bit of a leap. I don't know if it's balls or a lack of brains, but it's. But actually, listening to your podcast, with Steve Macklin, he said the same thing. You just have to do it. You have to actually say, no, I'm going to do this for real, not play around with the idea and procrastinate.
I want people to, that's going to be a main takeaway from this for some people, because that was another thing that I wanted to ask you about, or at least hone in on and highlight, was when you started Kayfabe News, you didn't know how to make a website. What'd you do? I talked to a few friends that knew how to do it. I got some things together, and then I did it. Yeah. That's how I've started anything that I've done that I love. I'm like, oh, there's a wrestling school, I can go to it. Yeah. I will go to it, and I'm just start doing it. Oh, I can get booked on those shows because I have this training that I've done. I'm going to go do that now. Yeah. Oh, people want me to come to their school to speak. I guess maybe I should make a website that says that I do that, because I can do that, and I'm starting to get asked to do that. So then all of a sudden I have a speaking career. Yeah. Oh, I can buy microphones, hook up to a thing, and then I can literally just put it on all the platforms. I can just do that myself. Yeah. Okay, I'll do that. I'll talk to some people and start doing it. Just do it. Yeah.
It's funny, you make it seem easy, but you couldn't have done the later things nearly as easily had you not, like, you wouldn't be nearly as comfortable holding that microphone right now if you hadn't held 1,000 microphones.
That's true.
In 1,000 different rings.
Which goes back to what I had said, right? I believe that we're where we are for a reason. Yeah. Life kind of prepares us appropriately, as long as we're realize that and like appreciate that and respect that. One thing that really stood out to me in your story you just told is Vince McMahon chuckling at your thing. Like,
I'm told this is true.
I almost want to give like a Chris Farley SNL question, like, oh man, what was that like? But like, that is kind of my question. Like, what was that like, or what did that feel like? Was there any validation in that? Like,
it's funny where the validation comes from. It doesn't come from money, because there's practically none. And it doesn't come from followers. I used to think it would come from, like, if I could just get 100,000 followers, if I could just get the YouTube this level, whatever. But it comes from the feedback that's almost always on an individual basis. Yes. So it was hearing that that Vince McMahon and Road Dogg at the time, they were working with the writers, and they'd sit around and laugh about kayfabe news.
Road Dogg is awesome. I have a couple of Road Dogg stories that I'll tell you after. You're just naming so many people that it's interesting that we've had positive experiences with a lot of the same people. So even if have you met Road Dogg?
I never have, actually.
He's such a kind, insightful, smart, awesome dude.
Yeah.
I just want to say that. So and knows wrestling on another level, like almost like that genius.
Well, he was born and raised into it, right?
Yes, but also you got to remember, like if you just look at Road Dogg, he doesn't look like a wrestler, and he's not very athletic. But the success that he's been able to get to and do at the level that he has with the limited amount of stereotypical what a wrestler's supposed to be, means he's a freaking genius. And he is, and he's awesome. So that's high praise.
Well,
from him.
You had said how like nothing's totally accidental and it builds. Every experience builds on the past one. I found that thanks to Kayfabe News and working on this movie project and other things, when I reach out to people, I say, "Oh, I've been working with Cody Diener and Colt Cabana and so and so," and I name the people that I've been working with, and I realize it's all the nice people. Like, and that's what I usually say. I'm working with so and so. All the nice people in wrestling, and I think I just gravitate towards them. And I found there's a lot of surprisingly nice people for what wrestling looks like.
Yes. So that one of the things that I also wanted to say was one of my main points that I make to kids when I'm speaking at schools is a lesson. I use wrestling to teach them lessons. That's what I do. Right? I tell my story, but
I wish you would come to my school when I was a kid.
I stop in my story and go, here's the lesson to take away, kids. And one of those is a simple one, but a really important one, and that is focus on the positive rather than the negative. Right? So,
boy, that's easier said than done, though.
It's definitely, especially in the wrestling world. And I know, and I've said this both on my podcast and privately to people, I know that the listenership to my podcast is probably going to be more of a slow build, and I will gain listeners slowly because I'm not taking the shortcut of going to the negative and doing the dirt, which will make people immediately be drawn to it because that's a short-term thing to me. Whereas positivity is the way to go. It's always been the way I want to do it, and I think that's important. And I think it's cool that you've done that too. Right. And you've just focused on the positive, and then focused on the positive people. As well.
Like Mick Foley being one of the big helpers. He's reached out. Sometimes he'll just send me a story idea like.
Really?
What about this for and he was hospitalized once and for a knee surgery or something, and he asked me, could you do a kayfabe story where I get attacked with a bedpan, something like that. But one day I was having a really bad day. I was at a hospital visiting my mom, who was very sick and dying at the time, and I didn't know if it was gonna be the last time I saw her, and so I was really down, and I get this message from Mick Foley on my phone just as I'm leaving the hospital, and the gist was like, don't forget that by putting out funny content, you're bringing smiles to people's faces. You're making people happy. You don't even know. Strangers out there in the world, you're helping brighten their day. And you asked about the feedback. It's when I get individual feedback like that, I get them fairly regularly. One just yesterday saying, Kayfabe News has brightened my day so many times for the past 10 years. I just want to help. How can I help? And that was it. Wow. And I said, well, you can follow and tell your friends. There's nothing they can do to help because that's why I do it. That helps. And there's times when I feel like my brain is mush and my ideas run dry, and then I get a message like that saying, hey, I know we've never met, but I was going through a really tough time and your stories helped me laugh. And
it's so interesting that you bring up Mick Foley, because he plays a part in my story too, and I'm kind of actually just realizing it right now. It was early in my career. He was the first really famous name wrestler that I had watched and wanted to be like. He's the reason I even started to go to wrestling school. As in high school, and I'm watching him and his training with Shane Douglas, and then learning his backstory and being fascinated by the real life Mick Foley, and then realizing, wait, I can actually do this. And he overcame a lot because he didn't look like a typical wrestler. I didn't look like a typical wrestler, so he inspired me in so many ways. And I did this show. It was the Ballpark Brawl. We would do a big show in Buffalo. I remember those. And he was on one, and I was in his locker room and with his son Dewey, and he had to go sign. He's like, just sit here and play with Cody. And I played Monopoly with Dewey as a young boy. And I remember leaving the room like half an hour later, like realizing how amazing, positive, and down to earth Mick Foley was.
Yep.
And then really processing it and realizing it. That guy has done it all.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still just a dude who's kind and down to earth. If I can be even a tenth of Mick Foley
Yeah.
in my career, that's what I should strive towards.
Yep.
And he really taught me that day. And he is still that person to this day. And I've got to work with him in TNA and
Yep.
meet him many times afterwards. I never told him that story. If I
should.
I should tell him that story and really how much that meant to me. And then when I started Giver for Charity and wanted to raise and started to raise money, I'm like, well, I decided to reach out to a couple positive people and see if they would just kind of help promote it to get the word out. He's one of the first guys I messaged. I DM'd him on Twitter, and within 10 minutes, he had tweeted about my Giver for Charity and started putting it out there. It's like, dude,
He's so good like
he's
that.
so good.
Yeah.
So
He was one of my favorite things I ever did with Kayfabe News. There was a YouTube show, and we did dozens of episodes of this YouTube show. Me and two guys in the UK. This is a real breaking kayfabe moment. I never actually say this. Simon Miller is a YouTuber in the UK.
Yep.
He played the news.
Simon, yeah.
He played the news anchor Philip and Marks. Flippin' Marks.
Okay.
So we did this newscast where I would write the material and he would deliver it like a newscast, kind of like Ron Burgundy. And Phil Chambers in the UK would edit it all together. And I got this. I had once done a kayfabe news story saying Mick Foley admits his fall from hell in the cell was totally fake.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd written this story, but I said to Mick, he was going to be in Tillsonburg, Ontario.
Oh.
And
I've wrestled. That was one of my main places I wrestled for half a decade.
Yeah.
I'm big in Tillsonburg.
Good old Tillsonburg. Yeah. I think he wanted to go there because it's in a Stompin' Tom song.
Yeah. Tillsonburg. Yep. Back to the lakes when I hear that word.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
He was singing it as we. So I said to him, could we meet up and turn this story into a real interview where you admit on camera that the fall from hell in the cell was faked? Yeah. And he did it in one take so perfectly where I did the interview. He's on the other side of the camera and he's saying, I'm ashamed to have misled my fans for all these years, but I was lowered from that cell on pulleys and I landed on a pillow and we fixed it in CGI. And he just did it. He even said, he never ripped it. His ear never got ripped off. And he did this thing where he turned his head and we digitally added like a cartoon ear.
Yeah.
So he, that fall from hell in the cell is his most famous bump of many, many famous things. It's one of the most famous things that's ever happened in wrestling. And he had the sense of humor and the lack of hubris to come on and admit, quotation marks, that it was fake.
Yeah.
Not many people would do that. They would stand by like, I'm the toughest man in the world. I took the biggest fall in wrestling.
Yes.
But he's like, oh, no, I didn't feel a thing.
So this is a lesson that I give to young wrestlers, and I think this applies in life too, because we know that wrestling is life is wrestling. Mm-hmm. One thing I always tell people, this speaks to it. This exact story is, I tell young wrestlers, don't take yourself too seriously, but take wrestling business very seriously.
Yep.
Right? You have to take it seriously if this is going to be a business, but at the same time, don't take yourself too seriously. And I think Mick Foley is the epitome of that.
Yeah.
Right? He's a businessman who knows the value of what he does in all of his endeavors, whether it's podcasting or speaking tours or wrestling in the ring, but it doesn't take himself too seriously.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge lesson. Okay. Talking about taking yourself seriously and getting into the ring, you make this decision that you are going to make a film about yourself as a referee.
Yes.
Right? And the name of the film is?
The Ref Didn't See It.
The Ref Didn't See It.
Yeah.
And you
exclamation point.
Yes.
We decided the title needed an exclamation point.
Very important.
Yeah.
The punctuation
this is the
is
English
important.
language, English literature
Yes,
graduates.
that's right. So where'd the idea come from? Why now? Where did this creative thing spawn from?
Well, in a roundabout way, you're involved in that too.
I want to take a quick commercial break to tell you some more about Rest When Dead clothing. Now, you've heard me talk about this awesome company for a couple weeks now, and I want you to know that they take pride in sourcing most of their items from North America, ensuring that they contribute to local businesses and promoting the growth of our economy. They're also proud to share that a majority of their profits are dedicated to various sponsorships and donations in the fitness industry all across North America. So by choosing Rest When Dead clothing, you're not only receiving exceptional products, but you're also actively supporting initiatives that promote health and wellness in our communities. Now, to tell you a little bit more about Rest When Dead are my daughter River and my son Abel. Time for them to take it away and tell you more.
Do you work hard? Are you focused, determined, never say die type of person? Well, you need the right clothes to match that mindset. You need to check out Rest When Dead clothing. Rest When Dead is a fitness and lifestyle apparel for ones who never quit. They're a cutting-edge fitness apparel company that embodies the spirit of hard work and determination.
With a strong focus on cool designs, high-quality materials, and exponential fit, Rest When Dead caters to individuals leading a demanding and active lifestyle.
At Rest When Dead, they understand that those who embrace a rigorous daily routine require workout and lifestyle attire that reflects their unique personality. That's why their design team works tirelessly to create innovative and stylish designs that make a bold statement, setting you apart from the crowd.
Rest When Dead is more than just a fitness apparel brand, it's a lifestyle. They create hardworking individuals who strive for greatness in all aspects of their lives.
Their clothing is a symbol of dedication, perseverance, and the pursuit of excellence. So, whether you're hitting the gym,
Going for a run?
or simply embracing your hardworking lifestyle,
Rest When Dead is here to provide you with the highest quality, stylish, and comfortable apparel
that embodies this essence. It's time to tell the world you will
Rest When Dead.
Rest When Dead is a wicked awesome Canadian company that ships worldwide. Follow them on Instagram at Rest When Dead Clothing. Check out their website at restwhendead.ca.
That's restwhendead.ca.
Okay.
So you did an interview with the podcast An Unscripted Spectacle.
Yes.
Which is
Let's plug them right now.
Yeah.
Give all the info on that.
The hosts are Marshall Ward, my friend for a very long time and the biggest wrestling fan I know,
Yes.
and Sarah Geidlinger, who's sitting across the room.
Who's been there the entire time, turning the knobs, making sure that we sound beautiful and look beautiful on camera. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes.
Thank you.
So Sarah,
everybody go listen to and watch Unscripted Spectacle.
Yes.
It's awesome. And I remember that interview. It was very well done and very fun. So cool.
Yeah. And it's actually, we talked about the power of reaching people who aren't wrestling fans.
Okay.
So Sarah didn't start as a wrestling fan. She doesn't know anything about wrestling, but we have this mutual friend, Marshall. I'm a wrestling fan. Marshall's a wrestling fan. They started this podcast together talking to wrestlers. And I
forced Marshall to make this podcast.
Right. Even though Marshall is the biggest wrestling fan in the world, he's like, oh, nobody's going to want to hear that. But the premise is a wrestling super fan, Marshall, and a wrestling non-fan, Sarah, talking to wrestlers.
Yeah.
One person knowing all of the details and the other one saying, wait, like Sarah asked in TJ Wilson, she said, they kept mentioning the people's elbow. And she was the one who had to say, well, what's the people's elbow, right? And you don't get that on wrestling podcasts a lot.
No.
So I was talking to those two, Marshall and Sarah, and maybe Sarah remembers the details, but this is true. I never really wanted to be a wrestler. I didn't want to, I didn't want to take my shirt off in front of strangers.
Yeah.
B, it looked too painful. C, it is too painful. I've learned it hurts a lot. And I'm old. I'm 47 now, and it's too late to start wrestling training and with the idea of being an indie wrestler. But I've always, I've danced around the periphery of wrestling, with Kayfabe News and PWI, and I've always loved telling stories that haven't been told before, and being a
interesting.
storyteller.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, what's a wrestling story that's never really been told? And nobody's ever really told the story of the referee. And
Interesting.
what I've learned is the referee is far more important than even I thought. I've always kind of paid attention to the refs because I was like, what role do they play in this magic trick, right? But I didn't fully understand until I decided. Well, I didn't decide. I said to Sarah and Marshall, yeah, what if we did?
September 2nd of last year, 22.
Wow.
We pitched the idea.
Okay, you tell this. What did I say?
No, I can't. I've lost my voice.
Okay, Sarah's sick.
Your voice sounds. I was gonna actually say on air, your voice sounds so beautiful.
Oh, thank you, but I'm sick right now.
Okay, so you're not gonna.
Well, you don't sound sick,
You
so
don't sound
tell us.
sick, yeah.
September
It doesn't sound sick at all.
2nd, 22.
Yeah.
You pitched the idea. How about this? You and Marshall are into making documentaries now. You've worked on so many documentaries yourself and miniseries,
Right.
And Quantum 101 and all these things in your, space science job that's so fancy.
Yeah.
We don't know what he did. He just wrote about it. And yeah, you pitched this idea that we follow you on your journey to become a pro wrestling or wrestling referee.
Mm-hmm.
We talked to all the friends that have been on Unscripted, the friends you've made through Kayfabe News.
Yeah, we asked people like RJ City and Colt Cabana, like, what do you think of this idea?
Yeah.
And it's RJ especially. He's so talented with showbiz generally.
Mm-hmm.
I put a lot of stock in his advice, and he said, "Yeah, nobody's done that. That's a good idea." And I was like, "But what?" He's like, "No, but." Like he was like, "That's a good idea."
Yeah.
And then Sarah and Marshall sent me a video
We did.
where Marshall was Randy Savage and Sarah was Miss Elizabeth.
Well, he had to tell me exactly what to say because I didn't know who Miss Elizabeth was.
Oh my gosh.
But Marshall said, "Ooh, we're gonna make this movie, yeah." And you said, what did you say? "Oh yes, macho," or something like that.
Something like that. Macho.
Yeah.
We could cut to it if you want to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah, I wanted to be in the wrestling ring, but not as a wrestler. I just wanted to see what it's like. I remember even going to training schools years ago and like just feeling what the ropes feel like. You just like bouncing off the ropes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I still get a thrill when I see a wrestling ring just set up.
Oh, that's cool.
I walk into a building, I'm like, there it is.
Yeah.
There's a wrestling ring. And you've been in so many, maybe you don't get that like buzz anymore.
I don't, but I totally see what you're saying. Like that's where the painting happens, man. That's the canvas.
It's hallowed ground.
Yeah,
you know?
It is. And it's I love that you said that too, because I think it shows that you respect that hallowed ground, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens. That's where, that is where people are creating amazing art. It's also where someone could die.
Yeah.
That's if the job isn't done right.
Right.
It's very, very important
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
So I started going to wrestling school, Off the Ropes studio in Kitchener, to learn basically what to do in a wrestling ring.
Yep.
And of course, it starts with, well, you have to know the basics of just like rolling and bumping. You have to at least have a sense of what we're going through.
Yeah.
And so I've done some of the calisthenics, some of the rolling, some of the bumping. I'm not very good at it. I'm not very courageous because I've hit my head before and been concussed before, just in real life, falling on the ice. And I'm so afraid of bumping that I think referee is the right place for me because if you're going down, you're going to your knees, not your back.
Yep.
And I've realized, boy, it's hard work. Wrestling is hard. And as much as I love the fun, happy, joyful aspect of wrestling, I've noticed I've refereed about, I think, 4 or 5 matches now.
Okay.
And when I'm in there, I'm feeling it. Like, it's real. You better listen to my rules and don't pull the hair and damn it, get off the ropes. And you got to, and I'm into it.
Yeah, you're plugged in.
It's
man.
intense.
You're dropped in. Yeah.
Do you get like carried away in the moment?
But that's when I really started to see success in wrestling, when I could get myself to that.
Right.
And I'm no longer playing a character. I'm just being that person. Yeah.
Right.
And if you can get yourself to that, that's the trick. And that's one of the things I tell young wrestlers is like, oh, the reason you're not connecting to the crowd, or you didn't do so well tonight and you didn't get the reaction, is I can tell you're just playing.
Yeah.
You're doing wrestler cosplay.
Yeah.
You have to be that guy.
Yeah.
So if this character that you've decided to be, you can't be them authentically, then you got to come up with something different. Yeah. So that's actually a really important thing. And I think there's a life lesson in that too. Yeah. Like if you are in a job that you feel like you can't be yourself in, maybe consider switching jobs.
Right.
Or why am I not being my authentic self here? And can I be my authentic self in this situation? And if I can't, I think in any situation, if you can't be authentic in it, you should question either the thing you're doing or yourself and whether or not you should be involved in it or not. So that's interesting that, you know, you're able to do that so fast and quickly, like, and just feel it. That's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I did a bunch of training matches in the gym in front of nobody and realized that I was doing all sorts of things wrong that you don't think about when you're a wrestling fan.
Of course.
You don't think about your body positioning in relation to the camera, especially, ideally, nobody thinks about the ref at all. And that's fun too. I'm 6'3". I'm kind of conspicuous. But I don't want to be the focus of attention at all until the split second that I do. So I'm trying to stay as low as possible. I'm trying to anticipate where the wrestlers are going 2 moves ahead so I can be anywhere they're not going to be.
Yep.
And man, did I not realize how hard physically just running around that ring, getting up, getting down, getting up, getting down, counting the 3, and the nerves of being in front of a crowd. Suddenly your sweat glands are just on overdrive.
Yeah.
And
so we talked at the very beginning of our conversation about your love of magic. Did this, now you're part of the magic trick. And are you starting to realize, oh my gosh, like you are now the equivalent of the lady that gets sawed in half. Like if you don't have the lady get sawed in half, then the trick can't happen. And a lot of the magic that's done in a wrestling ring is done through the referee and with the use of the referee.
So it's funny, once I started this project, which people can find at therefmovie.com.
Yes.
Sorry,
I'm going to put that in the show notes. I'm going to say it in my outro of the show, and we're going to say it at least 2 or 3 more times in this conversation.
What, we're going to say therefmovie.com?
I think we should probably say therefmovie.com.
How should we pronounce it? Therefmovie.com?
No, therefmovie.com.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Where were we? Before we were plugging the refmovie.com.
Oh, I was talking about magic. And
right.
Like
magic.
The lady sawed in half.
Yeah. So I didn't fully realize that's not true. I didn't even come close to realizing the role of the referee until I started doing this. And now I'm obsessively watching the referee. Oh, cool. I watch matches on YouTube where I'm only watching the referee. And what you described earlier, when especially an indie show where the wrestlers only have a few seconds in their entrance to set the tone for what their character is going to be. And the referee has to reinforce those characters. So I'm getting increasingly frustrated with the rule breakers but trying not to give any favoritism to the face, because what I've learned, even though we're part of the act, my job is to be a referee, to enforce the rules. And it's not an act. I have to remember what the rules are and know how they're enforced. And damn it, if you don't break by 5, I'm gonna disqualify. My last match I refereed, I got to disqualify someone for not rope breaking. I was like, this is power. I told her to stop. She didn't stop, and I disqualified her. Of course, that was part of the plan, but it still felt, the whole thing feels more real. So I've come to this idea that wrestling is both more fake than people realize and more real than people realize. So the fakeness, what I don't think I fully appreciated is just how much cooperation has to go into everything, including the refs, the commentators, the ring announcer, the timekeeper, the music person, and especially the 2 or 4, however many wrestlers are in the ring, because they're the ones whose safety is most at stake. But the amount of showbiz razzle dazzle behind it, I don't think I fully appreciated, and I sure didn't appreciate how hard that mat is, how much those ropes hurt to hit them, and just how badly things can go if something goes wrong. You know, we've seen injuries happen right up close, and when the show stops and everyone goes into crisis mode.
So if you're going through all this, like for me, I kind of learned a lot about myself as a person. like going through wrestling school and going through that journey, has this process, like, what has it taught you about yourself as a man, or as a, just as Colin,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, not necessarily a man, but just as you as Colin at this age, like, did you learn anything about yourself through the process that you maybe surprised you, or you weren't expecting to learn about yourself?
Yeah, well, I think what we've discussed is this could have just been an idea that I floated around in my head for years and years, had Miss Elizabeth and Randy Savage not sent me a video saying, we're making this movie.
Yeah.
It's the kind of, it's one of those ideas. I have a lot of ideas that come and go. And what I've learned is through the past 10, 15 years that I've done something in wrestling, whether it's PWI and especially Kayfabe News, what I've learned is that doing those things in a classy, friendly way and being nice to everybody and cooperating with other people online means that doors have just swung open for this project. I can reach out to Cody Diener and say, hey, would you look at my teaser? And you'll tell me. Yeah. And I think just being a good person, the whole internet wrestling community, there are other people who are doing funny stuff. There's a little subculture of people who are doing funny videos, YouTube videos, and we're all sort of or mutually supportive of each other. The good ones are, you find people that you want to collaborate with, and suddenly you have all these connections. And, Sarah and Marshall doing their podcast, that was largely me looking back on all these friends that I've made over the past 10, 15 years in wrestling, saying, oh, you should talk to Diener. You should talk to Gregory.
That was entirely you.
Yeah.
Each guest was invited by you.
That's true.
There's such an important lesson in that.
Yep.
And it's a simple one, but someone needs to hear this right now. It's a really easy one as you're going through your life. There's value in just don't be an asshole.
Exactly.
It's so simple.
Yeah, it's rule number one.
Oh, because when you're an asshole, like, it closes doors.
Yeah.
And you didn't do anything special. I mean, you did. Like, you were able to put yourself out there in all these different situations, but the reason you were able to put yourself out there and create all these things and follow your passions was you weren't an asshole.
Yep.
And then doors stayed open because you were kind. That's huge.
There's a rule there's a line in a Kurt Vonnegut book where a guy is speaking to a room full of newborn babies, and he says, babies, there's only one rule that I know of. God damn it, you've got to be kind. And that's it.
Wow.
That's the only rule in life.
Yeah. I love
and
that.
It does, pay off, not in a sort of financial or greedy way, but
Sure.
those things come back around. And I don't want to give the impression that the refmovie.com, that the ref didn't see it, is all about me, because one thing we've discovered is every time we reach out to somebody saying, would you like to be involved or do something connected to this movie, they almost always say yes. And they want to do something that they feel is positive and celebrates wrestling. So the movie stars me to some degree, but also Harry D., veteran referee of the Canadian scene, Emily Parker, who's a second-generation ref following in her father's footsteps, and Cameron Adamson, who you and I have discussed before. I imagine you've worked with a lot of refs.
I've worked with all of those
Ken
people.
Kensington is in this movie, and they've all described the kind of thing that we're talking about, what this has done for their lives. And that's what the movie's really about, is these people who are doing wrestling refereeing, that we're all following something that nobody expects to get rich off of it. Nobody expects to get particularly famous from it, but they're just doing it because they love it so much. And Emily's doing it to sort of honor her father, and she's learning from Harry D., who's her mentor. And there's a real family vibe to this where everyone's trying to help everyone else.
Oh man, you've sold me just on that alone. I did 4 elementary presentations this week, and then my 5th presentation out of school was to a secondary audience, and I talked to them about the power of influence, and I told them about my previous visits, and I said, you know what's sad when I talk to these elementary school kids and these young kids, and I ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? The number one answer I get from them is, I want to be rich and famous.
Mm-hmm.
And then I I have a discussion with these kids
Mm-hmm.
and I talk to them about how empty of a goal that is, and what's really matters in life is definitely not being rich and definitely not being famous.
Mm-hmm.
It's about just finding something that you truly love,
Yeah.
and then go for it.
Yeah.
And in that process, make sure you're kind and make sure you're being a positive influence.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like these are all like really key notes that are getting hit in this movie.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It really is. It's a celebration of happiness and joy that people find in wrestling.
Yeah.
Everybody has a backstory with challenges, and practically everybody in this movie is struggling with something, whether it was bullying or identity and feeling ostracized or being a misfit. But everyone talks about family, right? It all feels like a family in wrestling. And so what I didn't expect was that it would be not only a non-violent atmosphere, because wrestling gives off this
Sure.
idea of violence and combat, but it's like the opposite of violence. It's like backstage, it's anti-violence. Like, how can I not hurt you? How can we do this safely so I don't hurt my friend? And after the match, how can we get together and have a good laugh and a hug and celebrate together? I know that, every time I say this sort of wildly idealistic dream world of wrestling, veterans of it say to me, "Oh God, it's a shit show." But I haven't been exposed to the worst sides of it. And as someone who grew up assuming that wrestling is all seedy underbelly, right? I assumed it was all the mean wrestlers who were jerks to me outside the arena. I just assumed it was this nasty place where people fight because they're mean and they're tough and they're fighters. But practically none of the wrestlers I know are fighters or violent in any sort of way. They're performers.
It goes back to where you put your focus. Those guys that say it's a shit show and everyone's backstabbers. I've experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people stab me in the back. I've had people double cross me. I've had people stooge me off or say negative things. Like, that's all there.
Yeah.
But if I focus on that, then I wouldn't have been in this career for 23
Yeah.
years. Like, I wouldn't have got to follow my passion. So it's just where you put your focus,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like you're putting your focus, you just put it in the right place.
Yeah.
And if you just keep doing that in all your passions,
Mm-hmm.
then you can continue to move forward. And I think in general in life, just be a happy person.
Yeah.
And not
Yeah.
develop that bitterness that some of
Yeah.
the CD veterans end up developing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this movie that we're making, which people can find at therefmovie.com.
Is that where it is?
Yeah.
TheRefMovie.com.
It's, I told my family about this idea. I was going to make a documentary about the wrestling referees. And my stepmother was the one who said, "Oh, it sounds like that'll be fun for you, but it's not my kind of movie. I won't see it." But I was thinking, no, that's exactly who I want to see. I want someone else to go, "Oh, wrestling is not at all what I thought it was."
Yep.
Every time I take a new person to an indie wrestling show, the more hesitant they are, the more they think they won't like it, the more they love it.
Yeah.
And I've yet to take anyone to an indie wrestling show who didn't go, "Oh, this is fun." It happened just last week. It happens every time.
Yep.
You see a newcomer go, "Oh, I didn't know what wrestling was." Because the indie shows especially, it emulates what you see on TV, but what TV doesn't have is the interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all interaction. Wrestling is all. That's why in doing this movie, part of it is my attempt to fall back in love with wrestling, because when the pandemic hit and televised wrestling started to be done in front of no audiences, to me, I don't know, that was like synchronized swimming without an audience.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
I know. Yeah.
And I understand why they had to do it. But if a wrestler gets up on a turnbuckle and raises his arms to a crowd that isn't there and says, "Come on," to nobody, I couldn't do it without the fans. I couldn't watch it.
Dude, I had to do it for like a year.
Yeah.
With Impact. The only fans that I was wrestling to were the ceiling fans.
Yep. Jesus.
And that's what you hear, that's literally what you hear as
Yeah.
we're wrestling. In between bumps, I just hear, it's the
Yeah.
ceiling fans. It was so bizarre
Yeah.
and weird and not what it is.
And it reinforced to me that the fans are, I was rhyming off who's part of a show, the producers and the camera people and sound, but the fans are the show to me.
Yes, they are.
It's
so neat to bring
Yeah.
somebody that gets to. They don't realize when they go to watch this thing.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm bringing you, and now you're going to be part of this
Yeah.
event. You're part of it now.
Yeah.
And then that's ends up hooking
Yeah.
a lot of people.
The
So
audience is part of the show.
Yes,
It's
and then
like
they find a community sometimes, and
Yeah.
they decide I'm going to do this, and then they find a community, and then it ends up being something. It
Yeah.
can end up being something really positive and beautiful.
Yeah.
Which most people aren't expecting when they go to a wrestling show.
I think my third night refereeing was at an elementary school fall fair. A kid who goes to that school, his parents run the wrestling school in Kitchener, so they put on the show. And so there was no money in it. There's only 3 matches, no wrestling fans per se in the audience. And everyone said this is the best. This is the absolute best. Jeff Black, who was sort of running the show, he said, this is what I do wrestling for. Because there's all these little kids screaming and having a good time. And I think that's what people miss when they think, I'm going to become a wrestler and become the next Randy Orton. Well, Randy Orton doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to do the elementary school shows.
No.
It would be a nightmare. And I'm sure he gets lots of other benefits in terms of financial compensation, but that show I think may go down as my favorite.
Yep.
It was so pure and beautiful, and all the storytelling had to happen in that confined space.
Yes.
No TV montages to bring you up to speed.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good spot to end. We didn't do it on purpose, but it sounds like we did, because we started the conversation talking about our love for wrestling as kids.
Yep.
And really what drew us to it, and then you just wrapped it up in a nice bow with that. This is really what it is all about.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of cliche, but it really is.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your time.
I appreciate your time, both being in this movie, and I hope when I'm reffing tonight, we're on the same show.
Yep.
You're going to peek out through the curtain and tell me if I'm a good ref or a bad ref?
That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Okay.
And I'm going to teach you life lessons
Yes.
after, because wrestling is life.
And life is wrestling.
That's right. And people are going to go to therefmovie.com. Before we go there, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Sarah, who's been turning the knobs, is going to end up, she's going to shut things down, and then people are going to be able to come behind the paywall.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even tell you we were going to do this. I offer bonus stories on my Patreon that only my patrons get to listen to, so I get a nice, cool bonus story. So once we shut this down, we are going to hit the record button again, and you're going to tell me a fun, juicy bonus story that only my patrons are going to get to listen to. Are you cool with that?
I'm cool with that.
Okay, thank you, Colin. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, man. That's going to do it for another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener. If you want to jump behind the paywall and you want to listen to this bonus story with me and my friend Colin, it's available now over on patreon.com/Cody Diener. And this story is awesome. You heard us talk about, if you listen to both parts of my conversation with Colin, you heard about how he decided to get his foot in the door in wrestling by visiting TNA Wrestling back in the Orlando Universal Studios soundstage era, and he wanted to interview my friend Eric Young and Christian. And the cool backstory to that is, on that journey of getting his foot in the door, he's just working for a local newspaper in Kitchener, he ended up at Christian's house in Tampa. Whoa. You go from the small town Canadian kid who wanted to get his foot in the door working for a local paper, and all of a sudden he finds himself, all expenses paid, in Florida at Christian's house to interview him for this newspaper. It's a wild story, and it's available now over on patreon.com/Cody Diener. There's lots of different levels over there on the Patreon. Go check it out and consider supporting me and this project that I bring to you free each and every week on every podcast platform in the world, as well as YouTube at Cody Diener Podcast. If you want some other ways to support me, you can go on over to prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Diener. I got some wicked awesome merch over there. You can get a cameo from me. We got the Christmas season is coming up here. And if you want a present, an early Christmas present, get it on your list. Why don't you go check out cameo.com/Cody Diener and get yourself a cameo for a loved one this holiday season. I love doing those. I always have fun doing those. I want to do more, so check out my cameo. Also, check out my sponsor, restwhendead.ca, on Instagram at restwhendeadclothing. We got some new people in the crew. I'm the first wrestler that Rest When Dead has signed, but some fellow Impact Wrestling / soon to be in January TNA Wrestling crew is on there. We've got Jody Threat and we've got Crazy Steve, two fellow Canadians, jumping on board in the Reaper crew with the Rest When Dead crew, all Canadians, all loving the merch, all loving the swag. So go check out their signature shirts and go check out more of the entire collection over on restwhendead.ca. Welcome to the team, Jody. Welcome to the team, Steve. Me and Aaron York at Rest When Dead are super happy that you are part of the team. Next week, we're going to have a brand new guest, and you are going to like it. We are going back to an in-ring performer, an in-ring wrestler, and also a friend of mine. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but you can tell me what you're thinking of this podcast, and you can find out who that is by following me on my social media. I've got Facebook, I've got Twitter or X or whatever the heck you want to call it now, and I've got Instagram. All of that is at Cody Diener. Go check that out and you will learn who next week's guest is going to be. And also on there, you can take a screenshot of yourself listening to this right now, wherever you're listening to it, and drop me a line and let myself and Colin know what you thought of this week's episode. Another way you can let us know what you're thinking is jump right now, write a sentence, write a review on the podcast platform of choice. Give us a 5-star review. It just takes a second and it really does help us a lot. I don't know how, but it does when you do reviews and you got the star system. It helps the algorithm and it helps more people learn about this project that I am on, which is teaching life lessons through this beautiful thing called professional wrestling. If you want to book me on your show, promoters, hit me up at bookcody@codydiener.com. That's bookcody@codydiener.com. Help me share my love of professional wrestling with your wrestling fans. If you're listening to this right now and you're like a teacher, or you have a teaching friend or an administrator, a principal, a vice principal, or you work with a youth group somewhere and you're like, man, this was a really cool podcast and a really cool story. And that's also interesting that Cody Diener is also a professional speaker. Let me come and share some of my story and my journey with you in your school or your youth organization or your conference or event. You can check out all of my speaking topics, speaking reels, testimonials from people that have worked with me and my clients. You see a giant, right? Scroll down to the bottom of this page and you'll see my growing satisfied clients list. That's over at chrisgrayspeaks.com. That's CHRISGRAY speaks.com. And you can learn more about my professional speaking career and perhaps bringing me to your school or your event. That does it for me and my shilling of my various things that I got going on in my world. Hopefully I will see you at an event soon. I'm super excited about next week's guest. You should too. And we'll see you next week when you come back and you learn more about why wrestling is life is wrestling. We'll see you next week, guys.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life is wrestling.